So again, just appreciating our opportunity in life to meet the Dharma, and not only to meet it, but to have the freedom to learn it, to have the material wherewithal so that we can learn the Dharma and practice it instead of being impoverished, that we live in a peaceful place, that we have access to teachers and so on. So to really be aware that in our previous lives, we worked very hard to create all of the conditions so that we can meet and learn and practice the Dharma in this life. And so feel grateful to ourselves for having created the karma in our previous lives, whoever we were then. And also have a strong determination not to waste this opportunity, knowing that once death arrives, there's no way to press the rewind button or go back and do things differently. The time of death, we just have to experience the result of the karma that's ripening then. So now is when we really have the opportunity to plant good seeds in our mind and to gain realizations, and so not to waste this opportunity by getting involved in inconsequential things, or by wasting our mental energy thinking about things that are not very productive. So by putting our energy in the direction of the Dharma, may we nourish that aspiration for full enlightenment, and may we aim for full enlightenment, not for our own benefit, or solely our own benefit, but especially to repay the kindness of all of the sentient beings. Because we exist dependent on them and their kindness towards us. So the Dharma is always the best way to repay someone's kindness. So let's go in that direction. So a few days ago, I was talking with somebody about the idea of repaying the kindness. Yeah, and because we hear that sometimes, repay the kindness of our parents, repay the kindness of people who have helped us, repay the kindness of the Buddha. And sometimes, because of our own cultural conditioning, we hear the words repay the kindness as some kind of onerous burden that is being placed upon us that we didn't ask for. Any of you have that? You know, like, oh, well, I have a good opportunity. I didn't really ask for it, but I do feel I deserved it. But now I'm obligated to repay the kindness and do something for others, and I don't like feeling obliged and, like I have to, because then I feel guilty if I don't, and I feel trapped and blah, blah. Okay? So we may have that kind of emotional response to the words repay the kindness. That's not what the Buddha's trying to get us to feel when we hear the expression repay the kindness of sentient beings or repay the kindness of the three jewels. Yeah. You can't repay the kindness when you feel obliged and burdened. Because even if you do nice things with the motivation of being obliged and burdened, it's not really nice things. Okay, so the whole idea behind repay the kindness is that we really feel a sense of richness in our life. You know, a sense of fortune and richness, and out of that then automatically comes the wish to share it with others, yeah, and especially with those who helped us to attain it. Okay, so repay the kindness is done with a very joyful mind that that wants to share our richness and our good fortune. Yeah, so very different than feeling obliged or burdened, isn't it? Yeah. So we want to repay the kindness of sentient beings because through all of our lifetimes, they've been the ones who have given birth to us, given us food, clothing, shelter, medicine. They've been our friends. They've protected us from danger and so on. And from now until we get out of cyclic existence, other sentient beings will continue to provide us with all the necessities that we need for life. Yeah, and so to appreciate that, maybe we can't pay back the explicit sentient beings that have helped us in this life, but everybody's helped us in previous lives, so we can repay that. And that also becomes paying it forward. Yeah, and so especially when you think of repaying the kindness of the kindness of the three jewels, of course it means to practice the teachings. Yeah, that's the best way to repay the kindness. But the best way to practice the teachings is to benefit sentient beings. So if you really want to repay the kindness of the three jewels, then it comes down to benefiting sentient beings. Because who is it that the Buddha cares most about? Sentient beings. Why did the Buddha, why did Siddhartha become a Buddha? Because he cared about sentient beings. So if we want to repay the kindness of the three gems, three jewels, we have to repay the kindness of sentient beings. It comes to the same point. Yeah, and that's quite important. Otherwise we get this skewed idea of, when it comes to the three jewels, I am so holy and so reverent and so devout. And when it comes to sentient beings, they are so obnoxious. Just, leave me alone. Okay? And to realize that if we have that kind of attitude, we're not actually repaying the kindness of the Buddha. Okay? So to listen to the teachings attentively, to have a good motivation, to do what we can at present to benefit sentient beings, to try and practice in the future so that we can enhance our ability to be of benefit, and also to enhance our ability to discriminate what is beneficial for sentient beings. Because that is a big hunk of the thing, is developing the wisdom that knows how to benefit sentient beings. Yeah, because sometimes we develop a very skewed idea of benefiting sentient beings, as if it means becoming Mr. or Ms. People pleaser, and that's not benefiting sentient beings. Okay. So to really benefit others, we have to know in the long term, according to somebody's karma, their disposition, their inclinations, what is the best thing to do in the present situation that in the long term will be able to lead them to liberation and awakening. So it takes compassion and wisdom and skill. Okay? So, I hope you spent some time between last week and this week thinking about the teachings. So let me ask you, do the teachings of last week exist?
They do, yeah.
They do. Do they exist now? No. Okay. But they exist, don't they? Okay, so the past exists. Yeah. But what is the past? Okay. And that's why I was talking about the time machine going back into the past. You know, do you think that the past is reoccurring somewhere and we can have a time machine to go back there and then change things or redo things or whatever? No. Okay, there's no other kind of special universe where we're repeating everything that we can go back to, yeah? Because the definition of the past is what has arisen and has disintegrated. It's already disintegrated. Okay, so what is disintegrated, what has ceased, cannot come again. It's ceased. Okay? But that doesn't mean it's totally non-existent. It isn't happening now, but the past does exist. Okay? And the past, you know, is the having ceased or the having happened of what was once in the present. Yeah. So when the present disintegrates, it becomes a having ceased. Yeah. And that having ceased is, you know, a functioning phenomena. It's not permanent. It's a functioning phenomena. And it occurs after the present. The past object occurs after the present object. The future object occurs before the present object. Next week's teachings, okay, when we talk about next week's teachings, do they exist?
Yes.
Yes, okay, because the causes for them exist, at least so far. Yeah. Do they exist now? No. Okay. Do next week's teachings exist before they become this week's teachings?
Yes.
They do. So what comes first? The future. The future teachings come first. Yeah. Then when we get to next week, then it's the present teachings. Then when those teachings are over, then it's the past teachings. So this is what we're meaning when we say that the future object happens first, then the present object, then the past object. Okay? So let's go through a little bit these definitions or explanations of what they are. Okay, so if we take the sprout, or anybody have something else more exciting than a sprout? Yeah.
What about our Buddhahood?
Okay, maybe should we try our Buddhahood? Well, no, Buddhahood doesn't work so well. A mala? Okay. Cake. Cake. Okay, that'll keep people interested. Okay, so the cake. The future cake, yeah, is a non-affirming negative. I mean, it's an affirming negative, okay? So it's negating something at the same time it's affirming something. So the future cake eliminates the cakes having arisen already, okay? And it implies that the future cake is a functioning thing that is the non-completion of the conditions for its arising. So the future cake is a functioning thing, yeah, and it's the non-completion of the conditions for its arising, because all the causes and conditions for the future cake haven't come together yet. Okay, but it implies that It's that non-completion, but that the causes for it arising exist. Okay, so we can talk about the future cake, but we can't talk about the future rabbit's horn. Because the rabbit's horn may be the same in the sense that it eliminates the rabbit's horn having arisen, and implies that the future rabbit horn is a functioning, but does it imply that the future rabbit's horn is a functioning thing that is the non-completion of the conditions for its arising? No, it doesn't apply that, because there's never any conditions for a rabbit's horn to arise. Okay, so you can't talk about the future rabbit's horn, but you can talk about the future cake. Okay, now let's say, Venerable Yeshe has or whoever's cooking tomorrow, who's cooking tomorrow? Maybe Venerable Yeshe. Okay, whoever it is, knows, okay, we have flour and sugar and chocolate and all that stuff in the kitchen. Those causes are there. There looks today like there's going to be the time tomorrow morning to make the cake. So the conditions are there, but all the conditions haven't come together. Now, let's say by the time tomorrow morning comes, that Venerable Yeshe has a cold. And so she can't go into the kitchen and bake the cake. So at that point, there's no more future cake, because the causes and conditions for its being produced have ceased at that time. Okay, or at least we should say tomorrow's cake. There may still be the cause, and we will hold her to it, that there are the causes for the future cake after she gets over her cold. Okay? Then the present cake, has two conditions here. It's that which is, first of all, neither a Zhigpa or a past cake. Remember, the Zhigpa, the having ceased, means the past cake. So it's not the Zhigpa of the cake, and it's not a factor of future of some other thing. Okay, so this is a condition for something to be the present. It's not a past thing, and it's not a factor of the future. It's not a future thing either, a factor of the future of some other thing. Okay, that's one condition for the present. It's not the past, not the future. And second, it has been produced but has not ceased. Okay, so instead of produced, we can say the present has arisen, but it hasn't yet ceased. Okay, so in that way, that's the present. So we have to make clear that it's not a factor of a past thing, and it's not a factor of a future thing. Because otherwise somebody could come along and say, well, you just said that the past cake exists, so doesn't the past cake exist now as a present cake? No, you can't say that. You can't say the past cake is present. That doesn't work. Okay, then the past, so the present is not an affirming negative. The present is a positive phenomena. Going to the past, again we have an affirming negative, and here what it eliminates, what it negates, is a sprout not having disintegrated. Wait a minute. It eliminates a sprout not having disintegrated, and it implies, I see. And it implies that the disintegration of the sprout occurs in dependence on the sprout. I just want to check something to make sure I typed it right. Oh, here, when it says it eliminates a sprouts, it eliminates a sprouts not having disintegrated, which means that the sprout has disintegrated, okay? So the past is an affirming negative that eliminates the cakes. It eliminates the cakes not having disintegrated, which means that we ate the cake already. So it's eliminating our not having eaten the cake. Yeah. And it implies that the disintegration of the cake occurs independent on the cake. Okay? So it is the factor of Zhigpa, of another thing that has already been produced. Okay, so this thing, something that has been produced and has ceased, yeah, that having ceased is the Zhigpa, which is also the past object. Okay? The reason we keep talking about Zhigpas, and say it's easier to say Zhigpa than having ceased, but we could say sometimes I'll use one, sometimes I'll use the other, is because from the Prasangika view, the having ceased of an action is one of the factors that connects the action to the result of the action. Okay, so this is why it's important, because the philosophical tenet systems are always trying to show how the karma connects to the result. It's one of the main things that they're trying to prove. So this is one way that the Prasangikas do it, by saying that there's a having ceased. This action happened. Yeah, and it ceased. Yeah, and it ceased depending upon, its having ceased depends on the action. Yeah, but it's also a functioning thing, which means that it's impermanent, that it's changing momentarily, and that it will produce an effect unless something interferes with it. Yeah, so in the case of destructive karma, what could interfere with it is purification. In the case of constructive karma, what interferes with its ripening is getting angry or having wrong views. Okay? So this is why talking about the Zhigpa is important, because it helps explain how what we're doing today is going to link to whatever result we get in our future life. Okay? Or another way to think of it is, in our previous lives, we all created some collective karma to be here in a virtuous situation, in a dharma situation. So we created some virtuous karma in the past. That action that we did together in the past, whatever it was, ceased. But it didn't cease in the way that it became totally non-existent. Because there's a continuity, so that even if something ceases, there's a continuity that comes forward. So that continuity from that past action we did however many lifetimes ago, it wasn't, something ripening moment by moment as we lived between that action and now. But there was some continuity, and it's the Zhigpa, it's the having ceased of that action that helps carry that energy until today, when causes and conditions came together, that we were able to gather here in this room for this time and, share the teachings together. Yeah, and what the action that we're doing now is also ceasing and creating more Zhigpa that will ripen in the future. Okay. In the case of collective karma, we have the collective karma we did together, but we also have individual karma. So one person may be sitting here, falling asleep during the teachings, and that might be because at the previous time, when we were all together having teachings, maybe they were falling asleep, or maybe they had a lot of wrong views at that time, or maybe they were stepping over Dharma materials, so causing some obscuration, so that you can have the collective karma ripening at the same time as the individual. And then the other people, maybe who, last time were listening attentively or doing whatever they did or had a really good motivation, they wouldn't have that kind of obscuration this time. Okay? So, this whole refutation, we're going into this whole chapter about time. And again, the main subject is, refuting truly existent functioning things and really asserting that time is a functioning thing. Because there's some schools that say time is permanent. I'm not quite sure how they say that, but they must have some reason, because, for example, like the Hindus say that sound is permanent. The sound of the Vedas is permanent. So maybe they must, whoever it is that asserts time is permanent, must have some reason. I don't know what it is. And then other schools say that time is truly existent. And then the Vaibhasikas say that time is substantially existent. So the Vaibhasikas say that the past and future things substantially exist, which would mean that they're actually existing in some way now. That there's actually some future cake somewhere in the ether, that is substantially, and there's some past cake, even though it got eaten, But they say that the Vaibhasikas, that the past and future are substantially existent. The other Buddhist schools say that the past and future objects, I think they say they're permanent. Past and future are permanent. Okay? So it's only the Prasangika that say past and future are functioning things. That change. Okay, so there we're talking about future, present, past, right? Then there's another way to use words where we talk about the future in relationship to the cake, and the past in relationship to the cake. Okay, if you say that in relationship, it's implying that the cake is present. What is future in relationship to the cake is what is going to come after the cake. It's going to be the result of the cake, which will actually be the past cake. And what is past in relationship to the cake means what happened before the cake. And the future cake happened before the cake, didn't it? Okay, so when we talk about in relationship to, that is our usual way of how we think first the past, then the present, then the future, which is why we get so confused when we say the future cake exists before the present cake, and the present cake exists before the past cake. But if you talk about the past or the future in relationship to the cake, then what is future in relationship to the cake has not yet arisen. And that would be the past cake. Okay. What is, what is past in relationship to the cake is what has already arisen and ceased, which would be the causes of the cake, for example. Okay? Okay. So they say that Pension Sonam Zhigpa, he wrote the text for Loseling, I think. He said the sprout's cause is the future sprout. Yeah, so the cake's cause is the future cake. Yeah, the future cake becomes a cause of the present cake. The cake's effect is the past cake. Yeah, because once the cake has arisen and ceased, what do you get? The past cake. Okay? So it's important to realize here that the future cake is not the ingredients of the cake. Okay? Because the ingredients of the cake are positive functioning things. The ingredients of the cake are not an affirming negative. Okay? So the ingredients of the cake might be the substantial cause of the cake, but they're not the future cake. Yeah? Similarly, if we have, let's say, the past, well, if I use that, let's use a building instead of a cake. The past of the cake, the past of the building, or the past building is not the rubble that remains when the building has fallen down. Okay, because the rubble is a positive phenomena. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the past building is that factor of the buildings having arisen and ceased. Okay. Okay, Jason Chucky Gelson says the sprout which is presently being produced is the future sprout. Okay, this is very interesting. Yeah. When you have a seed, okay, at the time of the seed is disintegrating and the sprout is in the process of arising, isn't it? Okay, so here you have two agents. The seed that is performing the function of disintegrating and the future sprout that is performing the function of arising. But what is that future sprout that is arising? Is it something substantially existent? Yeah? Remember we talked before about the Samkhyas, and one part of the Samkhyas said that, well, they say that things are produced from themselves, that the result exists inside the thing. Okay, and that the result's inside the thing, and it just becomes, it's inside, the sprout is inside the cause, inside the seed, and it just becomes manifest. Okay, so if that were so, then you could say that the sprout were substantially existent. Yeah, but that sounds crazy to say, because if the sprout were substantially existent, it means that it already attained its own entity. This expression of already attained its own entity means that it exists, is present. Okay? If something already is present, you don't need the cause. Yeah? You don't need the cause, and the cause is long gone. Okay? So at the time of the seed is in the process of disintegrating, and simultaneously the sprout is in the process of arising. But you cannot point to a substantially existent sprout and say, there's the sprout that's in the process of arising. Okay? Because we do sometimes, I mean, we create all sorts of weird ideas, don't we? I mean, the Samkhya idea of, the result exists in the cause. That somewhere there's this sprout, somewhere in the ether, in the Netherlands, somewhere, and it just poof comes, into being. It already existed, but we just couldn't see it, and now. It's in the process of arising, and at the moment it arises, boom, there it is. Yeah? It's easy to think of it like that, isn't it? Yeah? Especially you can think, oh, my Buddhahood. My Buddhahood's already there. Yeah? It's already there. And it's, at one moment, it'll just manifest suddenly. Really? There's something really funny with that. Let me see if I can remember it. We were talking about this one time. Like, are we already Buddhas? Is our Buddhahood already here? Yeah. And there was one monk in the audience who said, yes, I think, we're already Buddhas. Our Buddhahood's already here. And Rinpoche looked at him and said, are you pregnant? And the monk said, I hope not. And Rinpoche said, well, what happens if you have the karma to be reborn as a woman in your future life and be pregnant and get pregnant? That's a possibility, isn't it? But does that mean you're pregnant now? It was quite a hilarious conversation. Yeah. So the same kind of thing. Yeah. The potential for Buddhahood's definitely there. Okay. But it's not like our Buddhahood is some nebulous something that is going to manifest magically. Okay, so so when one thing is ceasing, the other thing's arising. But the thing that's arising hasn't attained its own entity yet. Because once it attains its own entity, once it exists, then the cause has already ceased, and you don't even need the cause anymore. Okay, so we'll get into this a little bit further in this chapter, but one of the problems with saying that the past, present, and future are substantially existent, things that are substantially existent, they're there. They're there. Yeah, they're there. Okay? So if they're there, like a substantially existent seed would never go out of existence, or a truly existent seed would never cease, because from its own side it has the nature of being a seed from its own side, and that nature isn't dependent on any other factor at all. So that seed's never going to go out of existence. Yeah? So it means the seed's going to be permanent. So in that case, then either the seed can never produce a result, because to produce a result it would have to change. Or if you really insist that the seed is permanent and it still produces a result, then that result would keep on being produced, because the cause would never cease, and the seed would keep being there, so it would keep on producing more and more sprouts. Maybe that's what happens to the knapweed, and that's why it proliferates. No, actually, it's not that it's truly existent, it's just there's a lot of knapweed seeds. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Okay, so is all that clear so far? Okay. We won't go into a lot of details about that now. Yeah. Although well, here's a few interesting things, okay? In your present, okay, this is from Geshe Sonnen Rinzin. In your present, your past doesn't exist. But in general, past, present, and future exist. Okay? Understand that? At the present, your past, who you were yesterday, yesterday's you does not exist in today. Okay? But in general, the past you and the future you and the present you all exist. Okay? So that's the thing. Things exist, but they don't necessarily have to exist now. Okay? If it is now, it doesn't necessarily exist now. Okay? So is now is another way of saying, in Tibetan they have these two words that you can translate as is or exists. So it's just another way of saying that. Okay? So like our previous life doesn't exist now, but it does exist. Okay? Same with our future life. Yeah? The result of the pot is now, but it doesn't exist now. So we can talk about the result of the pot, can't we? Yeah, or that we can talk about the result of the cake. Yeah, but the result of the cake doesn't exist right now. Yeah, but in general, it exists. Okay. Okay. Similarly, we could say the cause of this telephone is now, but it doesn't exist now. Or we could say the cause of the telephone exists, but it doesn't exist now. Okay? It exists. The cause of the telephone existed in the past. Okay? Now, you know, we're on chapter 12 now. No, 11 of the 400. And, each of the chapters has had a concluding verse, a summarizing verse, that is not one of the 400. And I finally figured out that we should really read the summarizing verse at the beginning of the chapter so that we understand the point of the whole chapter. Okay, so I'm a slow learner. So here's the summarizing verse that occurs at the end of the chapter we are about to start. Okay? Not knowing how to posit continuity and transitoriness or impermanence. They say time is permanent and the three times exist substantially. Having understood that phenomena are like optical illusions, learn how the three times are perceived. Okay, so we're going to be refuting some wrong views in this section. What are the wrong views? It's talking about in the first thing. Not knowing how to posit continuity and transitoriness and impermanence. Yeah, transience. So people who don't know how to explain the fact that there's a continuity between past, present, and future, and the people who don't understand how to explain impermanence and transitoriness, because they don't know how to explain these correctly, they say that time is permanent and that the three times exist substantially, which means that the objects in the three times all exist substantially. Okay? Now, so that's what we're going to be refuting. Now, what this chapter wants us to understand is, having understood that phenomena are like optical illusions, okay, the phenomena are false, that they appear truly existent even though they aren't. Yeah. So knowing that they appear falsely, then, and when we're really certain about that, and we're certain that they're dependent arising, then that will give us the insight into emptiness. Okay? So having understood that phenomena are like optical illusions, then we're going to understand that they're empty of true existence. Yeah. And so how do we do this? Learn how the three times are perceived. So what does it mean to be a future object? What does it mean to be a past object? Okay? How does continuity occur within things being transitory? When we say that things change moment by moment, does something arise and then go totally out of existence, and something new arise in the next moment and go totally out of existence, and then third, a new moment arise and go totally out of existence? So it's like, a film, 3 different slides that are completely different things. Is that how there's continuity? No. Okay. So what does continuity mean? What can, within things changing and not being the same from one moment to the next, how do we establish a continuity? Is there something that goes from one moment of an object into the next moment of the object that makes it a continuity of that object? How do we establish continuity? Are you getting what I mean? Okay? So just think about this for a minute. Yeah? How do we do that? If things are ceasing, each moment ceasing, how do we establish a continuity? Yeah? And so here you can see how it would be very tempting to say, oh, but everything has some essence, and that essence goes from one moment to the next. The thing changes, but there's something that is this very subtle essence that goes from one moment to the next, that establishes the connection between the past, present, and future. Because if there weren't that, then when one moment ceased, there would be no connection at all. Yeah? So here we're talking moment by moment, but this is the same thing about what happens at the time of death. At death, is it just poof, that's it? Total non-existence? There's no continuity? But if there is a continuity, how do you establish that? What is it that continues? And so we have this feeling like we've got to be able to point to something that continues. Yeah? So what better to point to than there's got to be something substantially existent, something truly there. Everything has to have some essence that goes from one moment to the next, even though it's changing moment by moment. Okay? So that's what the proponents of true existence, or what we call the essentialists, that's how they explain things. And you can see how it would make sense, can't you? Because it feels weird, like, okay, this moment ceases, the next moment arises. There's something similar between the two things. Well, there's got to be something then that goes from one moment to the next that you can point to and say, this is what goes from one moment to the next. Right? I mean, to our ordinary mind, this...
Perfect sense.
It makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
And it's reassuring.
And it's very reassuring. Yeah? Because if there isn't something that we can point to that goes from one moment to the next, then everything is going to be total chaos. Because everything then would just totally disintegrate and not exist, and then things would arise out of nothing without any causes, and all that would be chaotic. So there's got to be some something that goes. Makes sense, huh? Yeah? And then the Prasangikas say, find it. Yeah? You think it makes sense that there's such a thing? Find it. Yeah? If you're saying there's really such a thing that goes from one moment to the next, point it out. Yeah? If from the previous one life to the next, there's something that goes that you can, point out that really is the person, let's do it, point it out. So Prasangikas say, they challenge. Okay, you believe that? It's show and tell time. Show me. Okay? So, this chapter is asking this kind of questions, So is time permanent and things substantially exist within time? Are the past and future permanent and only at the present do they become impermanent? Yeah, there's some permanent future thing. And you can see why people might think the future were permanent. Because if you say that the future is impermanent, then they're going to hear there's a cake in the future. There's a real cake. Yeah, there's a real cake in the future. Yeah. So they're going to hear that if you say time is impermanent. So then they say, oh no, the future cake is permanent. Because the future cake also can't function. Yeah, they would say the future cake is not a cause of the present cake. Yeah, the future cake is just some abstraction. It's a permanent phenomena, an abstraction that you made up. Same thing with the past. It ceased. There's no more whatever was, just is totally, it doesn't exist. So that's just some kind of abstraction, permanent abstraction that you made up, that's what the past object is.
How does that account for a continuity?
Huh?
How would that account for a continuity?
Yeah, well that's what the question arises. If it were like that, how do you account for continuity? Yeah, but in some ways, you guys saw how when I said the future cake exists before the present cake, you got pretty confused. Yeah? Yeah? And what is this? Because we hear future cake and we think we have an image of a cake, don't we? When you hear future cake, don't you have an image of a cake? Yeah, that is not the future cake. But in our mind, we create the image of that's what the future cake is. So then it would be very easy to say the future cake is permanent because it's a conceptual appearance. The past is permanent because it's a conceptual appearance. Okay? So you can see it would be very easy to say that. Yeah? Past is done, over, finished, forget it. Past doesn't function anymore, future doesn't function. Because it sounds strange to say that the future cake is a cause of the present cake. Because our mind goes, well then show me the future cake that's the cause of the present cake. And you see how our mind goes immediately to grasping at substantial existence. For us to think that the future cake is something that eliminates the cake having arisen and implies that the future cake is a functioning thing that is the non-completion of the conditions for it to arise. When you hear future cake, you don't think of, something that's the non-completion of the conditions for the cake to arise. Yeah, and that something that has eliminated the cake's having arisen. Yeah, you think we have the idea of a cake. Yeah, my cake looks is round. It has a birthday cake. You know, it has candles on it, the thin candles, and gooey frosting that I don't like at all. Yeah. Yeah, but that cake is, you know, the future cake that is going to be created. So you can see, you know, when we say future cake, you know, the factor of the non-completion of the causes and conditions coming together, and the elimination of the cake having arisen. What are you talking about? Yeah?
So it seems like that you've really, really separated out the mind that sees things substantially existent versus inherently existent in a way.
No, it's coming to the same point. Something inherently existent too would have to be there existing in the future too. If a future cake there. Saying the cake, the future is substantially existent, comes down to the same point as saying it's inherently existent. Yeah. Because in both cases, if it were substantially existent, the people who assert this may have slightly different ideas of what substantial existence and inherent existence mean. They may have different ideas. But from the viewpoint of the Prasangika, in both cases, if the future were substantially existent or inherently existent, then it would have to be permanent. Okay? So, for example, the Svatantrika Vanyatmakas may not say that the future is substantially existent. They may say it's inherently existent, but it comes down to the same point because in both situations, future would have to be permanent. Okay? Okay. So these are the kind of questions that this chapter is bringing up. Okay. Is time permanent and things substantially exist in it? Yeah. What would permanent time look like? What would a permanent future object look like? Yeah. What would a past inherently existent object look like? Yeah. But then, even from our own school, what does a future cake look like and what does a past cake look like? A past cake is not a stale cake. And a past cake is not your poop. Yeah. What is a past cake? Okay. The past cake is the affirming negative that eliminates the cake not having disintegrated and implies that the disintegration of the cake occurs in dependence upon the cake. That's what the past cake is. Okay, so when we talk about functioning things, because Prasangika put past and future in functioning things, yeah, and functioning things is synonymous with what? Impermanent. Okay, and product. Okay, there's three kinds of impermanent things. What are they? Three subdivisions of impermanent. Form, consciousness, and abstract composites. Okay, which one is time? Which one is past and future objects?
Abstract.
They're abstract composites. So the present cake is form, but the past and future cakes are abstract composites. You getting it? But do you see how our mind, it's still like there's some cake floating around out there. Yeah, that's magically going to appear. Okay, so you can understand how these guys, develop their philosophy, because it comes out of our ordinary way of thinking. Okay, so we're over time already. Okay, then next week we will start on verse 251. Okay? Any questions?
That's the question.
Yeah.
Okay. The section that we're talking about, the having ceased, that depends on the action, functions, is impermanent, and somehow connects to the results.
What?
The having ceased,
Yeah.
there are some qualities it has. It depends on the action,
Yeah, it depends on the action.
functions.
No, it depends on the action, and the action having ceased.
The action having ceased.
Okay, so the past action, or the Zhigpa of the action, eliminates the action not having ceased, and implies that the disintegration of the action depends on the action. Okay?
And then this idea that there's a continuity that comes forward from previous lives, which isn't like manifesting, but it still exists. Are those the latencies that we would call, or the energy traces?
Well, here when I'm talking about, some substantially existent thing that comes from one life to the other, that's what we're going to be negating. That's the idea of an Atman, a self or a soul. Okay? The Zhigpa do go from one life to the next.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's not the latencies.
No, the latencies are a little bit different.
They're not the having disintegratedness that might be
no,
the causes for...
The having disintegrated is the Zhigpa, but the latency or the seed of the action is different.
Okay.
Once we got into this discussion with the Geshes and His Holiness, and I asked about this, and we went around in so many circles until, how does this really happen? Until we decided to let the whole topic of Zhigpa cease. Because we were just, because then you get the Zhigpa of the Zhigpa. Yeah, the having ceased of the action. Okay.
So then the other one was, is the seed's disintegratedness a cause for the arising of the sprout?
Is the seed's disintegrated? So is the seed's Zhigpa
the cause
for the rising of the sprout? Well, I would say the seed is the cause for the sprout, but the seed is disintegrating present tense, whereas Zhigpa is having disintegrated. So I wouldn't say the seed's Zhigpa is the cause of the sprout, because at the time,
started making the present.
because at the time of the seed's Zhigpa, the sprout already exists.
Okay.
So the seed's Zhigpa is not the cause of
There's
this.
a relationship between the seed and the sprout.
Yes, because the seed's disintegrating, not its having disintegrated. It's disintegrating
Which is
occurs simultaneously with the arising of the sprout. So the disintegrating of the seed is simultaneous with the arising of the sprout, but neither of those is the Zhigpa of the seed.
okay.
Okay? Yeah, because once the seed has ceased, it can no longer
Be a cause.
be a cause for the sprout. Yeah.
And the other last one is that this continuity does, when you said how does continuity function, or how do we establish it? The word that came up for me is similarity.
Mm-hmm.
Without being truly existent, there's got to be a relationship between each one of those moments.
Yeah, and the next
And
moment.
the next moment, without being the same thing.
Right. Yeah. So remember last time we were talking about what arising, abiding, aging, and ceasing means? Let's go over that again. Okay. because that kind of falls into here. Okay, so the arising of a thing, so a thing arises, abides, and disintegrates simultaneously. Okay, its arising is its being the new creation of what didn't exist before.
Right.
Okay, its abiding is its similarity to what preceded it, and its aging is its not being a different entity from the previous moment.
It's not.
Is
I
some-
have is being. Huh. It's
I
not.
have aging as a...
Is its being a different, sorry,
entity.
yeah, aging is its being a different entity from the previous moment.
Yeah.
And its ceasing or disintegrating is its not having, it's its not lasting another moment. But its ceasing is not its having ceased.
Okay. He's not.
Because the ceasing occurs when the object still exists. The having ceased happens after the object has ceased.
Okay.
Okay?
So there's a question online related to
Okay.
this. When we say the past life exists, does that mean the past life exists as a Zhigpa, or the past cake exists as having ceased?
Yeah. Yeah, it's the Zhigpa of the past life. Yeah? Okay, when the past, because that's the whole thing about death. Okay, I didn't share that with you. I should say that. Where was that? About death. A sentient being's death is that sentient being's Zhigpa, or the past sentient being. Okay, death is caused by birth, so it's a caused phenomena. Okay, so the people who say that the past and future are permanent, we say, well, death is the having ceased of the person, and it's caused by birth, so it is a functional phenomena. Okay. Yeah.
When we were talking about Sravasti Hall, when we were building Sravasti Hall, we were always questioning when does Sravasti Hall exist.
Right.
And so at that point, when we were building and we had all the causes and conditions together, we could have said the future Sravasti Hall exists.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah, we spent a long time with the future Chenrezig Hall, didn't we? And now we're not going to build the temple for several years, but already the future temple exists. And we're becoming familiar with the future temple.
So is there a having disintegratedness? Is there a disintegrating of Chenrezig Hall, but not a having disintegrated?
So the Chenrezig Hall is disintegrating right now.
But it hasn't. It hasn't disintegrated.
Yeah, but yesterday's Chenrezig Hall has disintegrated.
Okay.
There's the Zhigpa of yesterday's Chenrezig Hall.
So when you make those different discriminations, you're getting more subtle?
Well, you're just I don't know what you're doing. Yeah, I mean, reminding us that when we talk about yesterday's Chenrezig Hall has ceased, is reminding us a little bit more that Chenrezig Hall is impermanent. Otherwise, we just say about Chenrezig Hall in general, Chenrezig Hall hasn't ceased. There's not the Zhigpa of Chenrezig Hall right now. But there is the Zhigpa of yesterday's Chenrezig Hall. Okay.
I think it could also help when you, for example, exaggerate a person's appearance or whatever, you fall in love and you have trained yourself in thinking in this context, that you might see clearly that this is a future existent, whatever. That you don't make it as permanent.
Oh, right. Oh, this is a very good example. Yeah. You fall in love, and then all of a sudden your future romance is like vivid in front of you. Okay? Now, is that future romance existent?
No,
Is it a functioning thing?
not the way you're seeing it. It's like the rabbit's horn.
It's like the rabbit's horn, isn't it? Because we've totally exaggerated what the future's going to be. Because this has to be, for a future object to be, it has to be the causes for that object exist. But the causes for our blown up, romantic whatever it is, doesn't exist. Yeah, our blown up romance is as existent as a turtle's mustache in the past, present, and future.
How about the future divorce?
Yeah, the question is, when the marriage is present, does the future divorce exist? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I have one.
Go ahead.
When you talked just now, like a couple moments ago, about like the future temple.
Uh-huh.
Let's say, that implies that the causes and conditions will come into line at one point.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say, I don't know, something happens and there's the causes and conditions. There's not that last cause.
Yeah,
Then
then
you just have the Zhigpa of the future thing and just go right into that.
no, then you don't
It's
even have
just
the present.
non-existent.
No, yeah, then it's non-existent, It would be like the cake, and she gets a cold, so tomorrow's cake then just doesn't exist. It's not, you can't have the past of the cake unless you've had the present of the cake. Yeah.
These teachings give me a new appreciation for our dedication prayer. May the precious Bodhi mind not yet born arise and grow.
Yes.
Have no decline but increase forever.
Or yes.
And the need to just keep creating the causes and conditions.
Yeah.
It's disintegrating.
Right. And to have faith that your future bodhicitta exists. Your future bodhicitta exists. Your future Buddhahood exists. So therefore we have to create the causes and conditions now for them. Yeah. Okay.
Does making cakes bring us to Buddhahood?
It depends on your motivation and your wisdom, how you're seeing the cake when you're cooking it. The future, for the future to be an actual future object, you have to have the causes for it. So we're creating that causes for that future object, and for that future object, eventually to be the present object. Yeah. Okay. And especially when we dedicate, we're steering how we want that merit to ripen. In which way, what kind of future we want it to be.